A red-flagged file sat in the hospital records room, untouched for 5 years. Everyone knew the rule. Never open it, never speak his name, never ask what happened. But Emma couldn't stop herself. Inside, she found the truth about a brilliant surgeon erased from existence. A man who saved lives the system said weren't worth saving. A ghost who haunted every corridor with a single terrifying question. What happens when doing the right thing destroys everything you've worked for? This is a story about forbidden files, impossible choices, and the courage to resurrect what others buried. Stay until the end, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to White Coat Tales, where every scar tells a story worth hearing. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights in the records room hummed their usual monotonous drone as I reached for the red-flagged file on the bottom shelf. My supervisor's voice echoed in my mind. Never touch the files marked with a red flag. Never look inside. Never speak his name after midnight in the cardiac wing. But I was a surgical resident who'd spent 3 sleepless nights wondering why the most brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon in the country had vanished from every medical database. Why his name made seasoned attending physicians go silent. Why his former patients sent flowers to an empty office. My fingers touched the folder's edge. Everything I thought I knew about medicine was about to shatter. The file felt heavier than paper should. Emma spread the contents across the metal desk, her phone's flashlight cutting through the records room's perpetual twilight. The first surgical report made her breath catch. A 72-year-old woman. Triple bypass. Ejection fraction at 15%. 3 surgeons had declared her inoperable. Dr. Adrian Cross had performed the procedure in 6 hours. The patient walked out 2 weeks later. Perfect recovery. Emma flipped through more reports, each one read like fiction. A teenager with a congenital defect that should have been fatal. An elderly man whose heart had essentially stopped during surgery. A child with valve damage so severe that the imaging looked like abstract art. All of them saved. All of them impossible. The handwriting in the margins was precise, almost obsessive. Notes about technique, measurements down to the millimeter, observations about tissue quality and blood flow. This wasn't just skill. This was artistry married to science in a way Emma had never witnessed. Then the reports stopped. June 15th, 5 years ago. The final page was different. An incident report with black bars redacted across most of the text. Only fragments remained visible. Unauthorized procedure. Patient consent disputed. Board investigation suspended pending. The rest disappeared into darkness. A photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Emma picked it up carefully, as if it might disintegrate. The man staring, back at her, wore surgical scrubs and an expression of absolute certainty. Dark hair slightly disheveled, eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. He stood in an operating room, hands resting confidently on a surgical table, surrounded by equipment that gleamed under the lights. He looked like someone who had never failed at anything. Someone who believed rules were suggestions meant for lesser talents. Emma lifted her phone and began photographing pages. The shutter sound seemed deafening in the silence. Her hands moved quickly, capturing surgical notes, patient outcomes, the redacted incident report, the photograph. Evidence of brilliance, evidence of something else. The door opened behind her. Emma spun, phone clutched against her chest. Marcus stood in the doorway, his security guard uniform crisp despite the late hour. He was somewhere north of 60, with kind eyes that had seen decades of hospital nights. Those eyes went wide when they landed on the red-flagged file spread across the desk. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. Marcus, Emma started. Put it back. His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Right now. Put it back and walk away. Emma's pulse hammered. I just want to understand what happened. Why everyone acts like his name is cursed. Marcus glanced over his shoulder into the hallway, then stepped fully into the room and closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. He moved closer, his hands shaking slightly. Dr. Cross didn't leave, Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. He was exiled, forced out. And the last resident who started asking questions, who went digging through old files looking for answers, she transferred to a hospital in Oregon within a week. Some people said she was encouraged to leave. Others said she was threatened. Emma felt cold spread through her chest. Threatened by who? Marcus just shook his head. His eyes darted to the file again, then back to her face. You seem like a good kid. Smart. Don't throw away your career for a ghost story. Some doors are closed for a reason. He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing fainter, then disappearing entirely. Emma stood alone in the records room, surrounded by fluorescent buzz and the scattered evidence of a brilliant surgeon's destruction. Her phone felt hot in her hand, full of stolen images. The photograph of Dr. Cross stared up at her from the desk, his confidence now looking less like arrogance and more like a challenge. She should return the file. She should delete the photos. She should forget she ever saw the name Adrian Cross. Instead, she slipped the photograph into her pocket and began gathering the rest of the pages. Emma arrived at the hospital at 5:30 in the morning, 2 hours before her shift. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photograph, those impossible surgical reports, the black bars of redaction hiding something the hospital desperately wanted buried. The oldest wing of the hospital smelled different. Dust and disinfectant mixed with something stale, the scent of spaces left untouched. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, half of them dead, casting the hallway in uneven shadows. Most of the doors had been repurposed. Storage, outdated equipment, administrative overflow that nobody wanted to deal with. Office 417 sat at the end of the corridor, its door plain and unmarked. Emma's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle. Locked doors had keys. Abandoned offices sometimes didn't. The knob turned easily. Inside, time had stopped 5 years ago. Medical journals sat stacked on the desk, their spines facing outward. The dates ran from January to June of that final year. A coffee cup sat beside them, its contents long evaporated into a ring of dark residue spotted with mold. The air tasted stale, undisturbed by ventilation or human presence. But the walls were alive. Surgical diagrams covered every available surface, each one annotated in handwriting so precise it looked printed. Notes crowded the margins, measurements, observations, questions followed by answers in the same meticulous script. Emma recognized some of the procedures. Others were techniques she'd only read about in advanced journals, approaches so innovative they bordered on experimental. Behind the desk, the wall transformed into something else entirely. Thank you cards. Dozens of them. Some store-bought with generic messages, others handmade, construction paper and crayon drawings from children, letters written in shaky elderly handwriting expressing gratitude for more years with grandchildren. A photograph of a young girl holding a trophy, her chest scar visible above her soccer uniform. The caption reading, "Couldn't have won without you, Dr. Cross." This wasn't the wall of a monster. This was the wall of someone who saved lives and kept the evidence close, a reminder of why the work mattered. Emma moved to the desk and picked up the face-down photograph in its tarnished frame. She turned it over slowly. The same man from the file stared back at her, but different. Here he was laughing, head thrown back, surrounded by a team of nurses and residents who were also mid-laugh, clearly caught in some shared moment of joy. His arm was slung casually over a woman's shoulders. His surgical cap sat crooked on his head. He looked alive. Human. Warm in a way that made Emma's chest ache. She slipped the photograph into her coat pocket, unable to leave it face down and forgotten. A sound echoed from the hallway. Footsteps, measured and purposeful. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. She moved quickly, slipping out of the office and pulling the door closed behind her as quietly as possible. The hallway stretched before her, empty but no longer silent. The footsteps grew closer. She walked quickly toward the main corridor, trying to look purposeful rather than panicked. As she rounded the corner, she collided with something solid. Not something. Someone. Dr. Helena Voss stood like a pillar of ice, her perfectly tailored suit not even creased despite the early hour. She was in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe knot, and eyes that missed nothing. Her expression was unreadable as she took in Emma's flushed face, her location in this abandoned wing, the guilt that must have been written across every feature. Dr. Walsh. Helena's voice could cut glass. What are you doing in this wing? Emma's mind raced. I was looking for extra storage space, for research materials. Someone mentioned there might be empty offices. Helena's eyes narrowed fractionally. The silence stretched between them, heavy with disbelief. This wing is not for resident use, Helena said finally, her tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. And storage inquiries go through proper channels, not early morning exploration. Emma nodded, unable to trust her voice. Curiosity, Helena continued, her gaze boring into Emma like a surgical laser, has ended more promising careers than incompetence ever has. Remember that. She stepped aside, a clear dismissal. Emma walked past on legs that felt unsteady, aware of Helena's eyes tracking her every step until she disappeared around the corner. Back in the resident lounge, Emma locked herself in a bathroom stall and pulled out the stolen photograph. The man's smile seemed to mock the fear coursing through her veins. She should return it. She should stop. Instead, she photographed it with her phone and tucked it back into her pocket, her determination burning brighter than her terror. Emma's morning rounds began with the usual rhythm of beeping monitors and hushed conversations, the cardiac recovery unit humming with the careful orchestration of healing. She moved from bed to bed, reviewing charts, checking vitals, offering reassurance to patients whose bodies were still learning to trust their repaired hearts. Mrs. Diane Porter occupied bed 7, a woman in her mid-70s with soft white hair and hands marked by age spots and IV bruises. She was 3 days post-valve replacement, recovering well according to the numbers. Emma pulled up her digital chart, scrolling through the surgical notes and post-operative care plan. Then she saw it. Previous cardiac surgery, 5 years prior. Surgeon, Dr. Adrian Cross. Emma's breath caught. She looked at Mrs. Porter, who was awake and watching the morning news on the small television mounted to the wall. The woman's color was good, her breathing steady. A miracle of modern surgery sitting upright in a hospital bed eating terrible oatmeal. Mrs. Porter, Emma said gently, pulling up a chair beside the bed. I was reviewing your history. I see you had heart surgery before, about 5 years ago. Mrs. Porter's entire face transformed. The polite patient expression melted away, replaced by something raw and immediate. Her eyes filled with tears that caught the fluorescent light. Her hand moved to her chest, fingers resting over the old scar beneath her hospital gown. Dr. Cross, she whispered, and the name came out like a prayer. He saved my life. Emma set down the tablet and leaned forward. Can you tell me about him? Mrs. Porter's words spilled out in a rush, as if she'd been waiting years for someone to ask. 3 surgeons told me I was inoperable. My heart was too damaged. The risks too high. They said I should get my affairs in order, spend my remaining time with family. I had maybe 6 months. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Then Dr. Cross reviewed my case. He spent 3 hours with me and my daughter, explaining what he saw that the others didn't. He drew diagrams on napkins in the cafeteria. He held my hand and told me I deserved a chance to see my grandchildren grow up. What was the surgery like? Emma asked, though she could guess from the reports she'd stolen. He visited me every single day during recovery. Mrs. Porter's voice cracked. Not for 5 minutes, for an hour, sometimes more. He brought me books because he knew I liked mysteries. He talked to me about my life, my garden, my family. I wasn't a case number to him. I was a person. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. Do you know why he left? Mrs. Porter's expression shifted. The warmth drained away, replaced by confusion and pain that looked fresh despite the years. He disappeared. One day he was there, the next he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. The hospital told me he'd moved to another institution, a better opportunity. Did you try to contact him? I sent a thank you letter to the address they gave me. Mrs. Porter's hands twisted the hospital blanket. It came back. Return to sender. So I started sending flowers to his office, every month for 5 years, hoping he'd come back, hoping he'd know someone remembered. Emma's throat felt tight. Mrs. Porter, do you know what happened? Why he really left? The elderly woman's gaze turned sharp, suddenly focused in a way that made Emma realize she'd underestimated this patient's perception. They wanted him gone, Mrs. Porter said quietly, leaning forward slightly. Because he cared too much. Because he wouldn't let patients die just because their insurance ran out, or the procedure was too risky for the hospital's reputation. He fought for us. For people like me who couldn't afford fancy doctors or private rooms. Her grip on Emma's hand became surprisingly strong, and they punished him for it. I don't know how. I don't know the details. But a man like that doesn't just disappear unless someone makes him. Emma sat frozen as Mrs. Porter released her hand and settled back against the pillows, suddenly looking exhausted. You remind me of him, the elderly woman said softly. That same look in your eyes, like you can't stop asking questions even when it would be safer to stay quiet. Emma left the room on unsteady legs, her mind reeling. She walked past the nurses' station, past other residents checking charts, and found herself in an empty stairwell. She pulled out her phone and stared at the photograph of Adrian Cross surrounded by his laughing team. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't someone who deserved exile. This was someone who had threatened the system by caring more about patients than profit. And now Emma knew she couldn't stop digging, no matter who told her to walk away. The summons came at 2:15, delivered by Helena Voss's assistant with the kind of careful neutrality that signaled trouble. Dr. Walsh, you're needed in the chief of surgery's office. Immediately. Emma's stomach dropped. She finished her notes on autopilot, handed off her remaining patients to another resident, and took the elevator to the top floor where administrative power lived in offices with actual windows and carpeting that didn't show decades of stains. Helena Voss's office occupied a corner with views of the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the space feel suspended above the world. The desk was massive, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. Helena sat behind it like a judge behind a bench, her expression carved from ice. She didn't invite Emma to sit. Dr. Walsh. Helena's voice was controlled, each word precisely measured. Hospital security flagged 2 incidents in the past 24 hours. Unauthorized access to restricted files in the records room, and your presence in an abandoned wing of the hospital at 5:30 this morning. Emma's mouth went dry. She opened it to speak, but Helena raised one hand, silencing her with the gesture. Dr. Adrian Cross is not a subject for investigation or discussion. His departure from this institution was handled by the board 5 years ago. The matter is closed. Do you understand? But patients deserve, Emma started. Patients deserve competent care within legal and ethical boundaries. Helena's tone sharpened. They do not deserve residents who break protocol to chase conspiracy theories about former staff members. Emma felt heat rise in her chest. He saved lives. Mrs. Porter told me he was the only surgeon willing to operate when everyone else said she was hopeless. How is that reckless? For the first time, Helena's facade cracked. Something flickered across her face, there and gone so quickly Emma almost missed it. Pain. Regret. She stood and walked to the window, her back to Emma. I was his colleague. Helena's voice went softer, losing some of its steel. His friend, even. Adrian Cross was the most talented surgeon I've ever known. Brilliant, innovative, fearless in the OR. She turned back, and her expression had shifted into something more complex. He was also reckless, emotional, unwilling to accept the realities of modern medicine, liability, protocols, limitations. He believed passion could overcome policy. What did he do? Emma asked quietly. Helena moved back to her desk but didn't sit. He performed an unauthorized surgery on a terminal patient after the ethics board denied approval. A child, 12 years old, 3 months to live, no insurance. Parents couldn't pay. The board said no because the risk was astronomical, and the hospital couldn't absorb the financial exposure if something went wrong. And the patient survived. Helena's jaw tightened. The surgery was a success, but the hospital faced potential lawsuits from the board for the unauthorized procedure and regulatory investigations that could have cost us our accreditation. Adrian was given a choice: resign quietly or face a public hearing that would destroy his career permanently and drag everyone who ever worked with him through the mud. He chose to disappear, Emma said. He chose to protect people who didn't deserve his protection. Helena returned to her chair, her authority reassembling itself like armor. Now I'm giving you a choice, Dr. Walsh. You are a promising resident. Your evaluations are excellent. You have a bright future in surgery if you don't sabotage it. Emma met her gaze. And if I keep asking questions? Then you'll discover that curiosity is a luxury reserved for people with tenure. Helena leaned forward slightly. Walk away from this. Dr. Cross made his choices and paid his price. Don't make his mistakes. Emma left the office feeling like she'd been hit. She rode the elevator down in silence, her mind spinning. Back in the resident lounge, she sat in a corner and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photographs of Adrian Cross's files. If he was simply reckless, why the complete erasure? Why did security guard Marcus look terrified? Why did Helena's voice crack when she said his name? Why did it feel like everyone was protecting a lie instead of revealing a truth? Emma opened her messages and typed a text to a number she'd memorized from one of the surgical reports. A long shot. Probably disconnected. But she had to try. Dr. Cross, my name is Emma Walsh. I'm a surgical resident. I found your file. I know what they did to you. I need to understand why. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The message delivered. Then, after 30 seconds that felt like hours, 3 dots appeared, showing someone was typing a response. Emma's shift ended at 7, but she found herself in the hospital cafeteria at 8:30, picking at congealed pasta that tasted like cardboard and regret. Her notes were spread across the table, a chaos of observations and questions that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. She didn't notice the man approaching until he slid into the seat across from her. Dr. James Kwan was somewhere in his early 40s, with graying hair at his temples and the kind of quiet presence that made people forget he was in the room. He worked in anesthesiology, rarely spoke at staff meetings, and kept to himself with the discipline of someone who'd learned that silence was safer than speech. "You're asking about Adrian Cross." Emma's head snapped up, her instinct to deny everything already forming on her lips. But James raised one hand, stopping her. "Don't." His voice was low, barely audible above the cafeteria's ambient noise. "I know because I was there, in the OR, the night everything fell apart." Emma's heart hammered. She glanced around, but the cafeteria was nearly empty, just a few nurses at a distant table and a janitor mopping the far corner. James leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. The patient was a 12-year-old girl, Sophie Brennan. Congenital heart defect so severe that 3 cardiologists declared her terminal. She had 3 months, maybe less. Emma set down her fork, suddenly unable to pretend at eating. Her family had nothing, James continued. No insurance, no savings. They'd already sold everything trying to get her treatment. The ethics board reviewed her case and denied surgical intervention. The risk was too high. The cost astronomical. If something went wrong, the hospital would absorb hundreds of thousands in losses with no way to recoup. "But Adrian," Emma whispered. Adrian couldn't accept it. James's expression was complicated, equal parts admiration and pain. He spent 2 weeks developing a surgical plan. Then he came to a few of us, people he trusted. He said he was going to operate off the books, late at night when the OR schedule had gaps. He needed a team, volunteers who understood the risk. You said yes. I said yes. James's voice carried the weight of 5 years of guilt. So did 2 nurses and a perfusionist. We did it on a Tuesday night. The surgery took 14 hours. Emma tried to imagine it. The secret preparation. The fear. The weight of a child's life balanced against career suicide. "It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I've ever witnessed," James said, his eyes distant with memory. Adrian essentially rebuilt her heart from scratch. Techniques I'd only read about in journals, innovations he created in real time. I've been an anesthesiologist for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Did she survive? She's alive today, living in Colorado with her family. Normal life, goes to high school, plays volleyball. She sends Adrian a card every year on the anniversary of her surgery. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Then why? The board found out. James's jaw tightened. Someone noticed the supply usage, the OR logs. They launched an investigation and threatened everyone involved with immediate termination and potential license revocation. Most of us recanted. Said we didn't know what Adrian was planning. That he'd misled us. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I recanted too. To save my career, my family, and I've hated myself every day since. Emma watched as James pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. An address was written in careful handwriting. If you want real answers, go there. But I warn you, what you find might not bring the closure you're looking for. Sometimes heroes don't get happy endings. Sometimes they just get erased. Before Emma could respond, James stood. He looked at her one last time, his expression carrying the weight of confession and warning in equal measure. Adrian took full responsibility, refused to name anyone else, accepted exile to protect us. That's the kind of man they destroyed. James walked away without looking back, his footsteps echoing across the cafeteria tile. Emma sat frozen, staring at the address in her hands, aware that she'd just been given directions to a ghost, and aware that she was absolutely going to follow them. Emma's day off arrived with rain that turned the city gray and soft at the edges. She drove for an hour, following directions on her phone through neighborhoods that grew progressively more worn, buildings hunching against the weather like tired shoulders. The address led to a low brick building with peeling white paint and windows that had been repaired more times than replaced. A small sign hung beside the door, letters faded but legible. Crossroads Community Health Center. Emma sat in her car for 5 minutes, engine running, wipers clearing rain in rhythmic sweeps. She could turn around. She could go home and forget she ever opened that red-flagged file. She could be safe. Instead, she turned off the engine and stepped into the rain. Inside, the waiting room was packed despite the early hour. Families crowded onto plastic chairs, children coloring on the floor, elderly patients with walkers and oxygen tanks. The air smelled like wet coats and antiseptic, and something else. Perseverance. These were people who had nowhere else to go. The nurse at the front desk looked up as Emma approached. She was maybe 50, with tired eyes and hands that moved with efficient kindness as she sorted intake forms. "Can I help you?" Emma's mouth felt dry. "I'm looking for Dr. Adrian Cross. Does he work here?" The kindness vanished from the nurse's expression, replaced by immediate wariness. Her posture shifted, protective. "Why do you want to know?" Emma made a split-second decision. The truth felt dangerous, but lies felt worse. "I'm a surgical resident at Metropolitan Hospital. I found his file. I know what happened to him. I think he was treated unjustly." The nurse studied her for a long moment, eyes sharp and assessing. Then she picked up the phone and spoke in a voice too low for Emma to hear. When she hung up, she simply said, "Wait here." 5 minutes stretched into eternity. Emma stood awkwardly near the reception desk, aware of curious glances from waiting patients. A child dropped crayons at her feet, and she bent to help gather them, hands shaking slightly. "Follow me." The nurse led her down a narrow hallway past exam rooms, with doors half open, revealing glimpses of doctors and patients, the intimate theater of diagnosis and care. They stopped at the last door. The nurse knocked once and opened it without waiting for a response. And there he was. Dr. Adrian Cross looked older than his photographs, lines carved deeper around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair showed threads of gray at the temples. But his eyes carried the same intensity Emma had seen in every image, that focus that seemed to see through surfaces into the truth beneath. He wore scrubs faded from countless washings, a stethoscope draped around his neck. He'd clearly just finished with a patient, his hands still smelling faintly of soap and latex. When he saw Emma, recognition flashed across his face. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented. Someone from his old life. Someone who'd crossed a boundary he'd thought was sealed. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice was lower than Emma expected, rougher, like gravel smoothed by water but still capable of cutting. Emma stood her ground despite the instinct to retreat. "I know what happened. I know about Sophie Brennan. I know you saved a child's life and they punished you for it." Adrian's jaw tightened. His hands flexed once at his sides, then stilled. "What do you want from me?" The question hung between them, honest and sharp. Emma realized she didn't have a clean answer. "I don't know." Her voice came out quieter than intended. "Maybe I want to understand why the system punishes compassion. Maybe I want to know if it's possible to be a good doctor without destroying yourself in the process." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. The hardness didn't disappear, but it softened at the edges, like ice beginning to thaw. He studied her for another long moment, then gestured to the exam table. Sit. This is going to take a while. Emma sat. Adrian leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 5 years of exile and something else underneath. Regret, or wisdom, or maybe both. The truth is more complicated than you expect. Adrian moved to the small window of the exam room, his back to Emma, hands gripping the sill. Outside, rain streaked the glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Yes, I saved Sophie Brennan. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of something harder. But that wasn't my first breach of protocol. It was just the one they could finally use against me. Emma stayed quiet, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. Over the years, I performed dozens of procedures on patients who couldn't pay. Adrian turned slightly, his profile sharp against the gray light. I absorbed costs myself, found creative ways to code procedures so insurance would cover them, fought with administrators every single week about transferring uninsured patients to county hospitals where they'd wait months for surgeries they needed immediately. He faced her fully now, and Emma saw the exhaustion carved into his features. I made myself a target. I knew it. I just thought being right would matter more than being convenient. But Sophie? Emma started. Sophie was the final straw. Adrian's expression went distant with memory. The case they could use to remove me permanently. 12-year-old with no insurance and a surgery so risky that approving it would open the hospital to massive liability. The perfect excuse wrapped in actual ethical concerns. You don't regret saving her. Not for a second. His voice was fierce. She's alive. She's thriving. That matters. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked at the edges. But 3 nurses who helped me that night lost their jobs. Dr. Kwan was almost fired, only kept his position because he claimed I'd coerced him. A resident who assisted, brilliant surgeon, she was blacklisted from every surgical program in the state. Had to switch to internal medicine. Emma felt cold spread through her chest. I saved 1 child and destroyed multiple careers. Adrian's hands flexed. People who trusted me paid the price for my heroism. So before you turn me into some martyr, remember that my choices hurt people who didn't deserve it. The silence in the exam room felt heavy, full of truths Emma hadn't expected to carry. I came here, Adrian gestured vaguely to encompass the clinic, because this is where I belong now. I can practice medicine without corporate oversight. Treat people who need help regardless of their ability to pay. I sleep at night knowing I'm not compromising. But, Emma sensed the unspoken word. But I'm lonely. Adrian's admission came out quiet. Cut off from the medical community that was once my family. I don't attend conferences, don't publish research, don't teach residents or push the boundaries of what's possible in an OR. I traded excellence for integrity, and most days I think I made the right choice. He looked at Emma directly, his gaze stripping away pretense. Why did you really come here? Emma's throat felt tight. I'm terrified of becoming the kind of doctor who follows rules that let patients die, who prioritizes protocols over people, who stops seeing human beings and starts seeing liability. Adrian's expression softened, becoming almost tender. You don't have to choose between being a good doctor and surviving the system. But you do have to be smarter than I was. How? Build alliances, document everything, learn which battles are worth fighting and which are distractions. He moved closer, his intensity focused but not overwhelming. I fought every fight like it was life or death. I burned bridges I should have maintained. I made enemies when I could have made strategic friends who'd support me when it mattered most. Emma absorbed this, the complexity of it settling into her understanding. Change the system from within instead of martyring yourself against it. Something like that. Adrian pulled a business card from his pocket, writing a number on the back. "This is my personal cell. If you ever need advice, call me. If you're facing an impossible choice and need someone who understands, call me." Emma took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you." As she drove back to the city, rain still falling, Emma felt both inspired and heartbroken. Adrian Cross wasn't a simple hero or villain. He was a brilliant surgeon who'd made impossible choices and paid impossible prices. And she realized with startling clarity that she was standing at the beginning of the same path, trying to decide which version of herself she'd become. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emergency at the hospital. Multiple trauma incoming." All residents recalled immediately. Emma pressed the accelerator, the clinic disappearing in her rearview mirror, Adrian's card burning like a promise in her pocket. Emma returned to the hospital feeling like she'd crossed an invisible border and couldn't find her way back. Everything looked the same. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. The floors still smelled of disinfectant. Nurses still moved with practiced efficiency between rooms. But Emma saw it all differently now. She heard administrators discussing patients in the elevator, their voices clinical and detached. Bed utilization rates, average length of stay, revenue per admission. Human beings reduced to data points in a spreadsheet. She watched insurance coordinators determine treatment plans, their decisions based not on medical necessity, but on coverage limits and pre-authorization requirements. A patient needed an MRI, but insurance would only approve CT. Another required a specialist consultation that fell outside their network. She noticed the quiet compromises everywhere. Doctors ordering cheaper medications instead of more effective ones. Surgeons delaying procedures until patients deteriorated enough to meet emergency criteria. The system grinding forward, efficient and ruthless, optimizing for everything except healing. Her next shift started at 6. By 8:15, the dilemma found her. Marcus Chen arrived by ambulance, 17 years old, vitals crashing, his chest displaying the telltale signs of catastrophic aortic dissection. Car accident, T-boned at an intersection. The impact had torn his aorta, the body's main artery, creating a medical emergency that measured survival time in hours, not days. Emma was in the trauma bay when they wheeled him in. His parents followed, frantic and speaking rapid Mandarin, their fear transcending language barriers. The mother clutched her son's hand. The father kept repeating, "Please, please," the only English word that mattered. Dr. Philip Garrett, the attending surgeon, reviewed the scans with practiced efficiency. His face revealed nothing as he assessed the damage. Then he checked the chart. No insurance information. The parents' terrified expressions when asked about coverage told the complete story. Garrett stepped into the hallway. Emma followed. "We'll stabilize him and transfer to county," Garrett said, already pulling out his phone to arrange transport. Emma's stomach dropped. "County won't have the capability. The dissection is too severe. He needs immediate surgical repair or he'll die." Garrett looked at her, his expression neither cruel nor kind. "Just tired. Dr. Walsh, if we operate, the hospital absorbs $300,000 minimum. That affects our budget. That affects how many nurses we can hire. That affects equipment purchases and facility maintenance. One life versus the collective good of future patients. He's 17. And I'm responsible for keeping this department functioning." Garrett's voice was firm, but not unkind. "This is the trolley problem in Scrubs. I don't like it either. But these are the choices we make every single day." He walked away, already coordinating the transfer that would sentence Marcus Chen to death. Emma stood in the hallway, hands trembling. She thought about Adrian Cross, about Sophie Brennan alive and playing volleyball in Colorado, about the nurses who lost their jobs, and the resident blacklisted from surgery, about the price of heroism and the cost of looking away. She pulled out her phone and found Adrian's number, her finger hovering over the call button. This was insane. Career suicide. She'd worked 10 years to become a surgical resident. One decision could destroy everything. Marcus's mother's voice carried from the trauma bay, a sound of pure maternal anguish that needed no translation. Emma pressed call. Adrian answered on the second ring. Dr. Walsh. She explained the situation in clipped sentences. 17-year-old, aortic dissection, undocumented, no insurance, being transferred to county where he'll die. Adrian was quiet for 3 seconds that felt infinite. Then, are you willing to face the consequences? Emma didn't hesitate. Yes. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Keep him stable. Alert or staff you trust. Nobody else. Be ready. The line went dead. Emma found Dr. Kwan in the anesthesia prep room. She pulled him aside, voice low and urgent. I need your help saving a patient off the books. James stared at her like she'd lost her mind. His face went through a rapid evolution of expressions. Shock, disbelief, fear, then something else. Recognition. He looked at her for a long moment, and Emma saw him remembering another night 5 years ago when he'd made this same choice. Finally, he nodded. Emma's hands shook as she began quiet preparations, aware that in 40 minutes, everything would change. Adrian Cross arrived at the hospital at 9:47 through a side entrance Emma had unlocked an hour earlier. He moved through the corridors like a ghost returning to haunt familiar halls, his footsteps quiet and purposeful. He carried a worn leather surgical kit, the kind that spoke of decades of use and meticulous maintenance. Emma met him in the scrub room adjacent to OR3. The team she'd assembled was small. Herself, Dr. Kwan. 2 nurses named Sarah and Michael who'd worked with Adrian 5 years ago and still carried the guilt of recanting their involvement. When they'd seen Emma's text, both had responded within minutes. We're in. No one spoke as Adrian scrubbed in. The silence carried the weight of what they were doing. Career suicide. Potential criminal charges, the destruction of everything they'd worked to build. But also a life. 17 years old. A boy who deserved more than death by policy. Marcus was wheeled in unconscious, his vitals declining despite the stabilization medications. His chest was prepped and draped, the monitors beeped their urgent rhythm. Adrian stepped to the table and everything changed. Emma had watched dozens of surgeons work. Good ones, competent ones, a few brilliant ones. But she'd never seen anything like this. Adrian moved with a precision that bordered on supernatural, his hands steady, his focus absolute. Every motion was economical, every decision instantaneous. He talked as he worked, his voice calm and instructive even in crisis. I'm accessing the aorta here because the dissection extends to the arch. Standard approach would take too long. We're going to repair from the inside out. Emma, watch the pressure. If it drops below 70, increase the fluids. For 6 hours, Emma existed in a state of terrified awe. Adrian rebuilt Marcus Chen's torn aorta with techniques she'd only read about in advanced journals. He improvised when instruments weren't ideal. He created solutions in real time when complications arose. He wasn't reckless. He was brilliant. At 3 a.m, Adrian placed the final suture. Marcus's vitals had stabilized 20 minutes earlier, his heart rhythm strong and steady. He'd live. Against every administrative decision, against protocol and policy and pragmatic calculations, he'd live. As they began closing, Adrian looked at Emma across the table. His eyes were exhausted but clear. Now comes the hard part. The surgery was discovered within the hour. Someone on the night staff had noticed the OR lights. the unusual activity, the presence of people who shouldn't be there. By 4:30, Dr. Helena Voss stormed into the recovery area where Emma sat monitoring Marcus's vitals. Helena's fury was volcanic. Her face was white with rage, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Who authorized this procedure? Who performed it? How did this happen under my watch? Emma opened her mouth to answer, to take responsibility, to protect the others. But Adrian stepped forward from where he'd been changing back into street clothes in the corner. I take full responsibility. His voice was steady. None of the staff knew I was coming. I coerced Dr. Walsh into providing access. She had no choice. It was a lie. Everyone in the room knew it. But Adrian was giving Emma an exit, a way to survive what they'd done. Helena's face transformed into something Emma had never seen. Not just anger, betrayal. Years of suppressed emotion breaking through carefully maintained control. She looked at Adrian like he'd wounded her personally. I should call security. Helena's voice was ice over fire. Have you arrested for trespassing, for practicing without privileges, for endangering this hospital? Adrian met her gaze without flinching. You could, but then you'd have to explain to that boy's family why you tried to let him die. The words hung between them like a blade. Helena and Adrian stared at each other, and Emma saw something she hadn't expected. History, connection, something that had once mattered and still did, despite everything. Finally, Helena turned to Emma. Her expression was unreadable. My office, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. She walked away without another word, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Adrian looked at Emma one last time. You did the right thing. Be prepared for the fallout. Then he left through the same side entrance he'd used to arrive, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness for the second time in his life. Emma stood in the recovery area, listening to Marcus Chen's steady heartbeat on the monitor, and wondered if she'd just saved a life or destroyed her own. Emma arrived at Dr. Voss's office at 6:45, 15 minutes early. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Chen's repaired aorta, Adrian's steady hands, the fury in Helena's face. She'd showered and dressed in her most professional clothes, armor for the execution she knew was coming. When she entered, her stomach dropped. Helena sat behind her desk as expected. But she wasn't alone. The hospital's chief administrator, Richard Brenner, occupied one of the leather chairs. Beside him sat Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation to Marcus, chairman of the ethics board. Their expressions were grave. Emma's career was over. Sit down, Dr. Walsh. Helena's voice was formal, devoid of the emotion that had cracked through the night before. Emma sat. Brenner spoke first, his tone clipped and administrative. Yesterday evening, you facilitated an unauthorized surgical procedure. You used hospital resources without approval. You involved a physician with no hospital privileges. You created liability exposure that could cost this institution millions if anything had gone wrong. He slid a document across the desk. Your statement, please. Explain your actions. Emma looked at the paper, then at the three faces watching her. She could apologize, claim coercion like the others had 5 years ago, maybe survive with a suspension instead of termination. Instead, she met their gazes directly. Marcus Chen would have died without intervention. County Hospital didn't have the capability or capacity to save him. I acted in the interest of preserving a life, and I'd make the same choice again. The room went silent. Brenner's face reddened. Dr. Chen's expression remained carefully neutral. Helena's eyes flickered with something Emma couldn't read. Then Helena did something unexpected. She stood. Gentlemen, I need to speak with Dr. Walsh alone. Please. But Helena, Brenner started. Now. The word carried absolute authority. Both administrators stood, exchanged glances, and left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded deafening. Helena's rigid posture softened fractionally. She moved to the window, her back to Emma, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter. 20 years ago, I was in your position, a young resident, talented, idealistic, faced with an impossible choice. Emma stayed silent, sensing confession. A patient needed an experimental procedure. The ethics board denied it. Too risky. Too expensive. My attending said we could find a way. Off the books, I said no. Helena's reflection in the glass looked haunted. I followed protocol. I chose safety. The patient died 3 weeks later. She turned to face Emma. I've spent 2 decades building a successful career on the foundation of that one moment of cowardice. I became chief of surgery by never coloring outside the lines, by playing politics, by protecting the institution over individual lives. Emma's throat felt tight. Adrian Cross was different. Helena's voice cracked slightly on his name. He didn't just know him professionally. I loved him. We were together for 2 years when the Sophie Brennan case happened. The revelation hit Emma like physical force. When the board demanded his resignation, I stayed silent. Helena's hands clenched. I could have fought for him, used my position to defend him, built a coalition of support. Instead, I chose my career. I let him take the fall alone. She moved back to her desk, each step deliberate. Adrian never blamed me. That's what made it worse. He just disappeared. And I climbed the ladder built partially on his sacrifice. Why are you telling me this? Emma whispered. Because I'm not going to fire you. Helena met her gaze directly. I'm going to protect you the way I should have protected him. But there's a cost. Emma waited, barely breathing. You have to work within the system to change it, not against it. Helena pulled a folder from her desk drawer. For 5 years, I've been quietly building a fund for exactly these situations. Uninsured patients who need complex care. It's been funded through private donations, restructured billing, and my own salary reductions. She slid the folder across. I want you to help run it. Use your fire, your courage. But channel it strategically. Be smarter than Adrian was. Be smarter than I was. Emma opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were financial projections, legal frameworks, patient criteria. A system designed to save lives without destroying careers. I see him in you, Helena said softly. That same fire. But you're smarter. You asked for help. You built a team. You didn't self-destruct. Her eyes held Emma's with unexpected intensity. Don't waste that. Emma looked at the folder, then at Helena, understanding dawning. The Ice Queen had been melting for years, slowly trying to atone. There's one more thing. Helena's expression shifted. Adrian is waiting downstairs in the cafeteria. I asked him to stay. Emma's heart stuttered. What? Helena's smile was complicated. I think it's time we stopped running from our ghosts. 6 months later, the hospital looked the same from the outside. Same glass and steel, rising against the city skyline. Same emergency entrance with ambulances idling. Same fluorescent-lit corridors that smelled of antiseptic and determination. But inside, subtle transformations had taken root. The fund Helena created, named the Crossroads Initiative in quiet homage to the clinic where Adrian had rebuilt his life, had helped 17 patients receive life-saving care they couldn't afford. Cardiac repairs, cancer treatments, transplant evaluations. Lives saved not despite the system, but because someone had finally found a way to work within it. Emma had been promoted to lead resident, a position that came with actual influence. She worked closely with Helena to identify cases where insurance denied necessary care, where undocumented status became a death sentence, where the gap between medical possibility and financial reality swallowed human beings whole. Marcus Chen had recovered fully. He'd started college on a scholarship, studying pre-med with the fierce determination of someone who'd looked death in the face and chosen differently. He visited the hospital twice a month to volunteer, always asking for Emma, always bringing thank you cards his parents had written in careful English. Dr. Kwan had become Emma's mentor in ways that transcended medicine. He taught her anesthesiology protocols, but also how to navigate hospital politics with integrity intact, which administrators to approach with innovative ideas, which battles to fight publicly and which to win quietly, how to build coalitions instead of burning bridges. The nurses who'd helped with the unauthorized surgery, Sarah and Michael, weren't punished. Instead, they'd been quietly commended and given positions on the Crossroads Initiative Oversight Committee. The hospital culture was shifting, slowly, like a glacier changing course. Patient outcomes began appearing in board meetings alongside profit metrics. Emma stood now in the old abandoned wing, back at the door of Office 417. But this time she wasn't alone. Helena stood beside her, holding paint samples and fabric swatches, discussing window treatments with the focus she usually reserved for surgical scheduling. They were preparing the office for its new occupant. Helena had been working behind the scenes for 6 months, navigating board politics, calling in favors accumulated over 2 decades, presenting financial models that proved compassion could coexist with solvency. She'd put her own career on the line, making it clear that if the board refused, she'd resign and take half the surgical department with her. Finally, impossibly, the board had agreed. Adrian Cross had been offered a position as Director of Patient Advocacy and Complex Care. Not a rogue surgeon sneaking through side entrances. An institutional reformer with an office, a salary, and the authority to change policy from within. Emma had helped. She'd spent months gathering testimonials from Adrian's former patients, dozens of them, letters describing. Saved lives, restored hope, years gained that shouldn't have been possible. An irrefutable case for his reinstatement built on the foundation of healed hearts. Adrian's first day arrived with autumn sunlight streaming through hospital windows. The cardiac wing was lined with staff and patients waiting to welcome him. Emma stood near the back, her throat tight with emotion she hadn't expected. At the front, Sophie Brennan waited with her family. She was 17 now, tall and healthy, wearing her high school volleyball jacket. The girl whose unauthorized surgery had cost Adrian everything stood ready to witness his return. When Adrian walked through the doors, the applause was thunderous. He stopped, clearly overwhelmed, his eyes scanning the crowd. He looked older, more worn, still cautious. But there was something new in his expression that Emma recognized immediately. Hope? His eyes found Emma in the crowd. No words were needed, just a nod of mutual respect that carried the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd built. That evening, Emma returned to her desk and found 2 framed photographs waiting. The first she recognized immediately. The picture she'd stolen from Adrian's abandoned office 6 months ago. Him surrounded by his old team, all laughing before everything fell apart. The second was new, taken that afternoon. Adrian, Helena, Emma, Dr. Kwan, Sarah, Michael, and several others standing together in front of the hospital entrance. A new team. A second chance. Proof that some endings could become beginnings. As Emma left the hospital that night, she passed the records room where this had all started. The red-flagged file was gone now, properly archived, its contents no longer forbidden or shameful. Just history. Just truth. She smiled. Some ghosts don't need to stay buried. Some need to be resurrected. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, no longer ominous but familiar. She'd found her path, not outside the system, not blindly following it, but transforming it from within. One patient at a time, one courageous choice at a time. The hospital doors closed behind her, and she walked into the autumn night, knowing that tomorrow she'd return to a place where compassion and medicine were finally learning to coexist, where files marked with red flags could be opened, where questions could be asked, where the right choice and the safe choice were slowly becoming the same thing, where ghosts could come home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please subscribe to White Coat Tales and share your thoughts in the comments below. What resonated most with you? Emma's courage to question the system, Adrian's sacrifice for his patients, or Helena's journey from regret to redemption? Let's connect and share our experiences together. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions and keep believing that compassion can change everything.